night, President Trump plunged the country into chaos without a shred of warning. The Trump administration announced a halt to virtually all federal funds across the country. In an instant, Donald Trump has shut off billions, perhaps trillions of dollars that directly support states, cities, towns, schools, hospitals, small businesses, and most of all, American families. This is a dagger at the heart of the average American family in red states, in blue states, in cities, in suburbs, in rural areas. It is just outrageous.
Just outrageous. The twice impeached, criminally convicted felon-in-chief Donald the Con Trump is a new order could impact billions, if not trillions of dollars of funding allocated to state and local government if it goes back to in effect on Monday. U.S. District Court Lauren Ali Khan blocked the action Tuesday afternoon, minutes before it was set to go into effect at 5 p.m. The administrative stay pauses the freeze until Monday. Bobby Kogan, the Senior Director of Federal Budget Policy at the Center for American Progress, joins us to discuss who may be affected by this decision. Bobby, how are you doing?
Doing great, Robert. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, thank you so much. Talk a little bit about who exactly this order, this executive order would impact if it was to go into effect on Monday.
Sure. So it is, they say it's not Medicare, it's not Social Security, and it's not payments that go directly to individuals. So that means not something like SSI and not something like veterans compensation, but it's much of the rest of the aid that the United States government gives. That's stuff like Section 8 housing, that's stuff like LIHEAP, that's stuff like Title I education grants, that's stuff like IDEA education grants for kids with disabilities. It's most of the things that people actually are relying on. Now, the asterisk here is that after kind of spelling out over 2,000 budget accounts internally, externally, the Trump administration walked it all back. And so their internal messaging implies that it's lots and lots and lots and lots of programs that Americans rely on, and their external messaging implies that it's nothing.
And so, as we've seen before, when President Trump was running for office, he said, I know nothing about Project 2025. I've heard nothing about Project 2025. I don't know who these people are or what's happening. But this is directly out of Project 2025. So should we believe their external messaging that we saw at the White House briefing today, or believe the internal documents which truly say they want to gut these federal programs?
I think we should believe the internal messaging. If you look at the budget request that Trump made when he was president last time, he called to eviscerate the social safety net. He called to cut SNAP in quarter. He called to cut Section 8 in third. He called to cut Medicaid in half, right? So they clearly want to do this. Whether their walk back is all a show or they got scared and wanted to lie about their initial policy, I think is a different thing. But it's very, very, very clear that externally they were feeling the heat. But to your point, I think that we should assume, and we had, there were reports today of states logging in and not being able to get their Medicaid money for the upcoming quarter. There were pauses on Head Start grants and that sort of stuff. So it's very clear that they were working towards pausing huge amounts of the federal government.
And what we've seen thus far with these 300 executive orders plus that were still coming down the pipelines is it seems that they're attempting to flood the zone. That if you throw enough crazy things out there minute by minute, hour by hour, there will not be enough money for lawyers to challenge every single one of these executive orders in court. There will not be the scrutiny to be able to dive into each of these things, because before you get through one, another crazy thing is going on. What can people actually do to fight back against these orders, and what does this administrative stay mean?
Yeah, I think that that's astute, right? I mean, the common theme of the Trump administration, the thing that runs through all of it, is chaos for the American public. I'm not sure what an individual can do per se. That if there are missed payments, any of the agencies or states or facilities that misses the payments will know, and then they will sue. And that will presumably put another stay, right? So you referenced the federal judge today who put a pause on it, but just through Monday. That's kind of fortuitous for the Trump administration for stays, because February 1st, the beginning of the month, would have been a huge period of a lot of federal outlays. So you'll have to wait for someone to get standing due to a missed payment, and then that person can sue. I would just say, if you're listening and you are not getting a benefit you are supposed to get right now, I strongly encourage you to talk to your local reps, and also to your district offices for your federal reps, because right now part of the issue is it's very difficult to understand what is going on. The chaos, the uncertainty is a feature rather than a bug.
And from a constitutional perspective, Chuck Schumer said it earlier, Congress has the power of the purse strings. When the president takes his oath of office, he raises his right hand and says, I will support and defend the Constitution. I will dutifully carry out the edicts of Congress. Does the president have the power? Does he have the ability to simply say, I'm not going to distribute money which has already been passed by the Congress, signed into law, and put forward?
No, he does not. If the president doesn't like this spending, there's actually a special path that's filibuster proof. It's easier to pass than a normal bill to help rescind and peel back unused funds. Right? If a president doesn't like a law, you can try to change the law. But what you're not allowed to do is simply ignore a law that you don't like. What you're not allowed to do is just not carry it out. Now, I will quickly say there are paths to legally pause spending. But President Trump did not take those. He didn't take them when he was in office in 2019 and illegally paused Ukraine funding, and he didn't take them this time, right? So what we see is a direct willingness to flagrantly violate our spending laws.
And on that point, he knows he can't do this. He knows he can't suspend the 14th Amendment when it comes to birthright citizenship. He knows he can't do many of these things. But what is the plan for people and for parties and groups to really fight back against this, besides paying lawyers exorbitant fees to go before federal courts? And then as a codicil, we have so many judges that President Trump appointed. Is there a chance that a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court, if it gets that far, may just decide to give him these additional powers?
I would be skeptical if the Impoundment Control Act is overturned. What President Trump is pushing is radical even for him. Now, of course, I say that, and then every week he comes out with another even more radical executive order. But the argument behind what he is trying to say is that spending and only spending laws are optional, and that Congress may not bind the president to spend. And what that would mean is that Social Security is unconstitutional. What that would mean is Medicaid is unconstitutional. What that would mean is Medicare is unconstitutional. It would mean that when you are owed your Social Security check, the president always has the option to say, no, I don't feel like giving it to you. That is a really radical legal belief, and that is what has to kind of undergird the idea that the president is always able to impound, right? He argues that the president has inherent impoundment authority, and that has to mean that the president can't bind any spending. I can't imagine the Supreme Court saying all of our entitlement law, all of our spending law is unconstitutional. That is a bridge very far. Now, will some Supreme Court justices say that? I'm sure some will, but I am maybe I'm too naive here, but I don't think that we will see it overturned.
I agree. And look, I want to be as optimistic as you, but I think we all said Roe was settled law. I think we all thought that the North Carolina, the Harvard cases on schools, that was settled law and affirmative action. So for people who are looking at this and trying to find out what are the steps going forward, can you talk a little bit about what happens if this administrative stay fails on Monday and this goes into effect? What will happen to individuals who are depending on many of these services like Meals on Wheels and other government programs?
Yeah. So by virtue of it starting back up on the 3rd rather than the 1st, there will be kind of a little bit of respite. Basically, they're targeting funds that get administered by other things. The federal government will give money to a state or to an authority or to a facility, and then they will carry it out. And so it's not that they can't continue to give out funds, it's that the federal government may not give out any more. So what we're looking at is when the federal government would miss the timing of a payment. Many payments come out at the beginning of the month, some come out quarterly, some come out annually, some come out when grants are due. So we are looking for something whose we're targeting something for when a payment ought to have gone out, but now because of this illegal order is not able to go out. And so we will only start to see the effect when kind of that first missed payment happens. And so it'll be program by program, right? Eventually, if this were to go on long enough, eventually this stops huge swaths of the federal government. But basically, it would start slow, and beginning of every month would be one thing. And then while some of these facilities have cash reserves, so even if they missed a federal payment, they'd be able to keep going for days, weeks. But the longer this goes on, that's when you start to see childcare facilities and preschool facilities. That's when you start to see them literally shut down. That's when you start to see people being evicted from their homes because they're missing all of their Section 8 payments and can no longer meet their rent.
And so with the new press secretary went into great detail to talk about the programs that wouldn't be cut or wouldn't be affected by this spending freeze. What programs specifically will be affected so that people will have a better understanding? We talked about Meals on Wheels, we talked about Section 8, but what are some things where people are going to tangibly feel the effects of this?
Yeah, so just to say, the press secretary is taking the public view that, oh, we didn't mean anything that we said. So that's where we have to, if you take the press secretary's view, then we're only talking about some of the green energy things and the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, and we're only talking, we're only kind of talking about those. That's what they said publicly. What they said privately is that it is much larger. So for the tangible effects for people, that would be your free or cheap preschool is now closed and you are no longer able to get that. That will be your school lunch that you get from school. There's no more funding for the school from the federal government. So maybe you just don't get that because maybe the school can no longer provide it, and the state and your local school district can no longer provide it, right? So it kind of depends on whether private entities are able to step in and fill the void. But the tangible effects, if this goes on long enough and is as broad as they implied it would be, and that their private messaging says it would be, it is stuff like your nutrition, it is stuff like your education, it is some of your healthcare, your community health centers and stuff like that, and it is some of your housing.
And so before we run out of time, where can people get more information on this and really keep up with what's going on? Because we've seen Facebook has gotten rid of fact checking. Twitter has gotten rid of fact checking. There's so much misinformation coming out, disinformation. And we've got the press secretary who apparently now can just pick the media that they want to have at press conferences. I don't know how many people saw that earlier, but they announced that they will now be having podcasters, bloggers, conspiracy theorists be in the White House press corps. So it's very difficult to discern what the actual information is and how exactly we can address it. Where can people get accurate information from, and what can people do to fight back? I think that's the biggest concern folks have.
Sure. I put out a paper, or it should be out in minutes if it's not already. It's my attempt at trying to explain all of this. I would just say there's been tons of reporting from the Washington Post, from the New York Times, from Politico, from lots of groups that are trying to lift it up. The difficulty is just no one really knows what's happening. In terms of what you can do to fight back, it's going to sound like cold comfort, but I truly, truly think the best thing that we can be doing is, to the extent that we are missing a payment that we know we are supposed to get, we should be flagging that for journalists, for our local elected representatives or whatever. Right now, the biggest advantage that the Republican that Trump has, the Trump administration has, is the chaos. No one really knows what's happening, and anytime we say this is happening, they say no, it's not. So that to the extent that you are actually experiencing something, getting that to someone who can help elevate it is actually incredibly, incredibly helpful.
And just last question, we talked a lot about the fact that this is the real Project 2025 coming to fruition. This is what as Roland would say, we tried to tell you that this was what's going to happen. For the people who are out there saying, well, Kamala is Indian and not black enough, well, now you might not have Meals on Wheels and Section 8 housing. But with that, what are the next Project 2025 executive orders that you think might be coming down the pipes?
Well, I'm a budget person, so speaking just in my issue area, I expect to see even broader impoundment. I expect to see even broader kind of, they've been doing trial balloons. On day one, they did kind of pretty targeted, what they thought would be politically advantageous illegal pauses in spending, and that also comes straight from Project 2025, where they said we're not going to spend on the stuff that we don't like. We're just going to have it follow the president's policy. They did trial balloons, and then they did this big one, and then they immediately walked it back. I expect to see a lot more of that kind of, coming through. But again, that's just my issue area. And so for the other stuff, I don't feel super comfortable opining.
Well, I think it's something we have to watch, and if they are able to take the power of the purse string away from Congress and move it into the executive, we are fundamentally in a different form of government than what our founders said. I grew up with conservatives saying we want less power in the executive. We want small government. We want power to be more democratically with the Congress and with the people. And as soon as they get into power, all that goes out the window. I tell people all the time, don't listen to the flowery language. Watch the actions that people are taking. Thank you so much, Bobby, for joining us. How can people follow you on social media?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm on Blue Sky, and it is BBKOGAN. And for now, I'm still on the bad site, but mostly I'm on Blue Sky.
All right, Bobby Kogan from the Center for American Progress. All right, we'll be back after the break. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network.